smarter and not harder by leveraging technology. So I've spent my career mostly in the technology space, which means this remote work thing for us is actually super common. I've been at digital ready companies a majority of my career, which has afforded me a lot of flexibility in how I work, but it also means setting boundaries has been a journey, to say the least. So really excited to be in this conversation today, just based on my experience and also in the role that I am in at UpWork. I'm helping people connect with opportunities that are more flexible. So happy to share more about that and some of the research that we've done prior to and since COVID-19 hit. Just to give you a lay of the land for kind of what we'll be covering over the next 40 minutes or so, really want to just shed light on my trajectory and my experience working remotely. We have to obviously address the elephant in the room, which is COVID-19 and the impact of it, both on remote work and on really just the overarching hiring experience. Dig into some long-term remote work trends, because it's not going away, just to state that at the top, as well as some best practices for both working remotely and applying for jobs amidst COVID, and some virtual interview tips and tricks. Like I said, ask questions throughout, intended to be a discussion. Feel free to unmute or use the chat, but I'll go ahead and dive in. So just to kind of speak to a bit of my story and why I'm here having this conversation. I graduated from UT in 2013 with a major in advertising and public relations and a double minor in business administration and leadership studies, which in and of itself is a mouthful. When I was leaving UT, I had had a lot of really wonderful internship experiences and work experiences, but didn't really have a clear path for what I wanted to do afterwards. I'd always loved working, but I just didn't know exactly what that meant in this new capacity of a full-time employee. So instead of picking a job or a career, I picked a location and I moved out to Los Angeles on a whim about a month after graduating with no job and just about no furniture. It's an adventure for folks who are graduating, seniors on the line, one that I really enjoyed, but isn't for everyone. I was fortunate to land at a company called Meat and Potatoes, which was a boutique design firm, really specializing in packaging, music, and entertainment, as well as spirits, which was a really cool experience, the one that wasn't particularly challenging. My career really took off when I landed at a company called Nation Builder, which is where I spent about 6 years of my career. And Nation Builder is a SaaS or software as a service company, and specifically designed a technology to help nonprofits, political candidates, and organizations, as well as just more general advocacy groups, really connect with supporters and get their message out more effectively. That was, for me, my first experience and introduction to working in tech, which, as I mentioned, is typically a place where you see a lot of remote work experiences as well as encouragement. So being in tech ensures that I always have a Mac in front of me about 99% of the time, and I'm able to work just about anywhere so long as there's an internet connection or hotspot available. It was a really great experience being at Nation Builder. It really gave me a crash course into what it looks like to work in a tech company, what it looks like to work in a growing startup in particular, and some of the challenges that comes along with that. But it was, for me, my first introduction to working remotely. That was amplified in my last year or so at the company when I actually moved back to Chicago, which is, for me, home, where I currently am. And I was a remote employee for the company for about a year and a half. I had the opportunity of leveraging a WeWork office, though still very different than being in a headquarters where you're connecting with people face to face, having meetings in person. It's a very different experience that I'm happy to share with you all today. In November of this past year, I moved to a company called UpWork, which is, while based in California, has an office here in Chicago. And part of the reason for me was actually that I did want to be back in that office environment, connecting, having human interaction on a more reoccurring basis. So that's just a bit about my background and kind of what brought me here. UpWork is a company that has built the largest global independent contractor and agency platform deliberately designed to connect Those independent contractors are folks who want to work more flexibly with opportunities to do so based on their experiences. That being said, I spend a lot of time understanding hiring, firing trends, what's happening in the staffing industry, as well as what's happening within the remote work space more broadly. And I am constantly just reading on that. So lots of data and facts coming at you live in just a second, but just wanted to name that that's a lot of the research that I do is really oriented around how are people working, what are the trends in the workforce space, and what's the future of work look like. Every piece of that has shifted pretty dramatically in the last month, but mostly towards fast tracking some timelines we were already seeing. So that's a bit about me and kind of where I'm coming at this from. So just to, at the top, get the elephant out of the room, big thing to note is what the world looked like prior to COVID-19. Prior to, only about 5% of companies were really leveraging remote talent. And what I mean by that is folks who are deliberately working remotely for themselves as those independent contractors. Only about 5% of individuals or companies felt comfortable leveraging those talent providers. Similarly, only about 70% of companies were allowing for any sort of ad hoc remote work. That number's increased dramatically. Almost 90% of companies are currently working remotely and encouraging their employees to do so. What's interesting about that is that almost 75% of companies have indicated already, based on this experience, they intend to move about, if not more, 5% of previously on-site employees to remote positions. The big thing to name there is that, one, people are starting to learn how to work remotely, and they're learning that it's not as scary as it was. So they're more likely to engage with remote, flexible talent, and they're implementing changes to their policies now that are permanent, not temporary changes, to really provide that level of flexibility. All of the data, stats, and numbers point to people want to work more flexibly. And a lot of companies historically have been uncomfortable or concerned about what that means from a productivity and interpersonal standpoint. With COVID-19, folks are able to see in real time what their employees are able to do now that they are working remotely. And what's interesting is to see that, in fact, more are feeling more comfortable with additional remote work in the future. That being said, it's unknown what the future looks like. We can project, and we've been projecting, that 75% of the workforce will be remote or have somebody remote in their department by 2028. That being said, it's obviously increased. Now that we're seeing these permanent changes, now that we're seeing companies get more comfortable with it, there will be more remote work now and forever. Kind of building on that, the long-term vision has always been the same. One, there's the supply of people who want to work remotely and more flexibly. They want to be able to set their schedule, build their family, and maintain some level of normalcy while also having the autonomy over their work-life schedule. And with this experience, naturally, more folks are being able to kind of test drive that experience and get feedback from their employees and provide feedback to the employers. Most companies were not equipped for remote work ahead of COVID-19. And so having to get all of the systems in place, all of the structure that an individual might need in order to work effectively has been a bit challenging for folks. Now that that's in place, lots of opportunity for more of this in the future. The big thing that I want to kind of hit on here is I'm a millennial. I know Stephanie would also fall into the millennial bucket. And millennials and Gen Zers are moving to more senior levels within companies. We're also the generations who are more comfortable with this remote digital first work. 50% of companies have already adopted remote work, and 74% of Gen Z and millennial managers have remote employees currently. That's a statistic from 2019. We're just seeing those numbers increase. So as more folks from those generations move into higher up positions, the majority of people working for them will be remote, and we'll see that number increasing over time. like I've said a few times now, and I apologize, but COVID-19 is the unmissable part of the conversation, but we do see that increasing just as a result for sure. Um, like I said, about 73% of departments will have remote workers by 2028. Really what I'm getting at here is while we're preparing for remote work now, the big thing is to prepare for remote work future, because that is the future of the workforce and that's the future of the way people will be working together as one with one another. So this is a slide we talk about a lot at UpWork, and I wanted to share it with you all today just because I think it really paints a valuable picture. So on the left, we have the supply, about 150 million independent contractors in the US and EU, and this is as of last year. And 47% of millennials are currently participating in some level of gig or contractual work, where they're setting their schedule, working for themselves, and making money on the side with the autonomy that they need. On the flip side, a lot of companies have had a hard time finding people with specific skills. This has shifted dramatically, and some of these numbers will continue to shift over the coming months. But with unemployment previously being at its lowest, obviously not the case anymore, we were seeing that there was an increase in demand and lack of talent available in the market willing to come in-house and work for one organization. That's as a result of people wanting to work more flexibly. So with more folks moving in this direction, with this being available more broadly, there were fewer people willing to work in a more traditional way. Really important just to call out that while we had previously projected that a majority would be working remotely by 2027, that's just going up. We see it now, we see it having those lasting impacts as a result of COVID, but just know that there is, while the demand has kind of shifted, because more employers are more comfortable with remote work, we still kind of see this actually shifting more positively moving forward. So just worth noting as well. Now let's get into what it means for all of you who are applying for jobs amidst COVID-19. I've been doing a lot of research on the industries that are currently hiring and really spiking just right now. Learning and development, I know that's a huge space. Folks figuring out how to do learning and development remotely is a huge area. So just want to note that based on folks on the line. But additional industries to be mindful of are telecommunications, delivery services, and logistics as well, because that is still operating as business as usual. Startups and technology. I've linked layoff.fyi, which is a database of tech companies that are hiring and have had layoffs. So just noting that while tech and startups are still continuing to boom, and we've seen in previous recessions that though that industry in particular tends to see growth during these times, it's important to note that it's not a one-for-one. So there are still obviously spaces within the tech industry that we are seeing layoffs. Pretty obvious one here, but healthcare supplies, and pharmaceuticals continue to be an area of need. IT has boomed as a result of remote work. Services like Zoom are seeing massive increases in the volume they're able to do just because of more folks working remotely and it being one of the premier platforms for telecommunications. Customer service is another big space. There have been some changes happening as a result of COVID-19 in areas like India, where a majority of customer service spaces had previously been held. With those changes, there's a lot of companies really struggling to find skilled customer services and support individuals to bring them in-house to actually work for them, just as a result of a lack of talent available in the markets that had previously been utilized. That being said, some industries that, obviously be a bit more wary of during these times are in hospitality, in e-commerce, and in commerce in general. Anything in retail have seen some pretty significant declines as food supply naturally has spikes as well as declines depending on where within the industry you fall. But those are just a couple key industries that are still continuing to boom and do business as usual right now. I have linked a handful of really valuable resources here. Layoff.fyi I mentioned. The other big one I do want to call attention to is Candor. This is a user-generated database of who's freezing hiring as a result of COVID-19. If there's companies that you're looking at and really eager to get in with, definitely check out these resources. It's going to be an incredibly valuable tool to get a better sense of where you're able to potentially see greater opportunity. There's a lot of data coming out, and all of this is changing rapidly. So just note, these resources are being updated, but the resources available online are massive. LinkedIn's publishing studies every month. You can get a lot of information from Gartner. There's a lot, Mercer has a whole database of COVID-19 specific to hiring resources. So just noting that there's a lot that you're able to utilize. These are just a few that I've found really beneficial when considering where to go, where to get started. When it comes to virtual interview tips and tricks, I had a hard time keeping this list short. And this is also true for working remotely. So a lot of this carries over to what it looks like to work remotely after you've landed the job. So just to name, the first thing I'll have to call out is setting up your space. Being mindful of the background appearance as well as noise. If you have a cluttered background or a lot of distractions, that can force your interview to just be more focused on those items and less so on you. I know a lot of folks have been asking me to play the piano. I actually don't play the piano, but that would be something that I would definitely want to remove in advance of interview. Lighting is also a big thing. Being as close to natural sunlight or having light shine on you will ensure that you're being lit properly and just creates a higher level experience. Sound, huge. Please don't take interviews outside, even if they are remote. It's just not a good look, and you'll get all of the wind and the background noise. Test your sound, test your lighting, get on a mock call with somebody just to actually see and experience it. Or if you have access to something like Zoom, you can also record yourself and just test talking through a few things and hear it back. I really recommend that. It's a really valuable way to just actually get a sense of what things look and sound like in advance of the actual interview. Like I said, practice, test your space you use before the call, practice looking at the camera. That's the other big thing folks don't know. So I've been looking at the side to see if any of you put your videos on, but if I look directly at the camera, it's a totally different experience where it feels like I'm looking at you and it's super awkward. So test it, get comfortable with it, build that capacity. If you need to put like a sticky note right above it, just so that it calls attention to look right there, really encourage it. Folks have a tendency to look at themselves on video calls more than anything else, but making sure it looks like you're speaking and making eye contact with the person you're interviewing with as best you can by making eye contact with the camera is going to be your best bet. You can all now tell when I'm looking at the camera and when I'm looking at you, which is, I'm sure, super fun. This is something that I was thinking a lot about in just preparing for this, and that's being prepared to connect digitally. So for folks who are, graduating seniors, juniors on the call, we've all had, and I'm older than all of you, but I've had the benefit of practicing video calls through FaceTime and Skype and all of these different resources for many, many years. Building relationships over video is different. Being prepared to build rapport while being remote is going to be a different experience. Asking them questions that are less so about the physical office and more so about what you're seeing within the space. Being able to just acknowledge humanity, I think, is a huge thing. Everybody's working remotely right now. So, something I've done a lot is like, hey, I'm sorry in advance if you hear my dog's in the other room, like, it's still new and we're still getting used to it. How are you doing with this? We can all connect on the remote experience right now. That being said, figuring out ways that you can build rapport and engage people before the actual interview begins will be invaluable and something people will take note of. So just want to acknowledge that how you're able to engage and how you're able to be personal through the digital communication will, in advance of the interview actually beginning, is incredibly valuable. And these are all specific, like Please refer to all of the UT resources on more general interview tips. These are just more specific to those virtual interviews, which folks I know are beginning to experience right now. The other thing is being prepared for new and different questions. So in light of COVID-19, you'll be interviewing remotely, but getting a better sense of what their long-term remote work strategy is, getting a sense of how they support remote employees, what their appetite for remote work is, will be incredibly valuable. I do encourage preparing a handful of questions that are specific to that. What's the experience been like for your employees moving remotely? How are you equipping them to be successful? Things of that nature, because getting clarity on that before you join the organization, while you might only be working as a remote employee temporarily, it'll still be valuable to get a sense of what they're doing to support their employees, both in the short and long term. And then when it comes to following up, I normally would encourage handwritten note 100% of the time. That being said, they won't be at their office, and it's pretty creepy to ask for somebody's home address. Please don't do that. So a couple things that I would consider. One would be Vidyard. Vidyard is a tool that allows you to record like a digital message. So you'd actually be able to record yourself saying, hey, thank you so much for the time today. It was super valuable to connect. Really eager to hear more about next steps and look forward to hearing from you soon. That could be a video. You send it to them in an email, and it's incredibly personal. Something that you, when considering how to follow up, just think of something you feel comfortable doing that is digital and personal in lieu of being able to provide a handwritten card or something of that nature. So those are just a few tips and tricks that I would utilize during this time when applying for jobs right now, and welcome any questions folks might have to that end. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so I will just get my cursor back over here. Maybe. Cool. So remote work best practices, we could have a very long conversation about more broadly. So I did want to note, these are some of my favorite things that I've learned in my experience, though this is not an exhaustive list. There's so many schools of thought on how to work remotely effectively. And in light of the current situation, more content is being produced on remote work, best practices, how to run a meeting, you name it, there's content on it. So just noting that in addition to these resources, there's a lot more out there that I do encourage folks to seek out if you do move towards a fully remote experience. So I want to acknowledge that I have an office. As folks are graduating seniors and in similar positions, I would assume that your first apartment may not have a dedicated space. So a couple things to be mindful of to really set the tone for I'm now working versus I'm in my home. If you have a space, amazing. I'm typically only in my office during working times. I keep my computer here. I try to really utilize this as my workspace. If you can't have a space, there's a lot of psychology behind using a scent as part of the trigger to now I'm working. So something a good friend of mine who's been working remotely for about 3 years has done is she has a candle, same scent, she buys it all the time. She burns that candle at the beginning of her workday and she blows it out at the end of her workday to really remove that scent. It's a great mind shift tool to ensure that you're focusing in on the work at hand. If you're in a position that doesn't require you to be speaking to people on the phone or through video chat on a regular basis, something else to consider would be a playlist. Again, lots of psychology behind this. People do it for the gym, for work, etc. So just naming that, utilizing a sound or a smell in lieu of having a physical space to focus in on is definitely something to consider. Then when it comes to getting the tools that you need, big things that I know I need to be effective that I think are pretty consistent across the board. First and foremost, high-speed internet. Make the investment if you're working remotely, even part-time, just temporarily. It'll change the game in your ability to run the systems you need to while also being on a video call and having other people in the home using the internet. So invaluable to have high-speed internet. Having a headset or some system. I have like 8 different headsets that I use. My AirPods are for talking on calls because they're discreet. I have Bose noise canceling headphones for when I'm not doing that and want to listen to music because it's noise canceling and I can't hear the outside world. But figuring out what you need in terms of sound and audio will be invaluable. If you are doing a lot of phone calls or video calls, Jabra would be my recommended headset, since they do a lot that do have the mic, which is really valuable to have. Then some things that I know are I benefit from, but typically find that my remote work colleagues utilize as well, having a monitor. So I have a screen that shows the slides I'm presenting, and I'm able to see all of your faces on my desktop. It's really valuable to have multiple screens, especially when you are doing video conferencing and presentations. So you're able to compartmentalize as needed while also seeing everything you need to see. Having a keyboard, a mouse, and a good camera, also super valuable. Obviously, if you just have your laptop, that'll totally work, but being mindful of what you need to be effective and what screens you need in your new role will be super beneficial. It takes time to sort those things out. So these are just my recommendations based on my experience. As you onboard to a new company as a remote employee, getting a sense of what they recommend will be valuable as well, so that you understand what's potentially going to be provided for you versus what you might want to get for yourself. Creating structure is the most important thing in my opinion, and I can't say I'm perfect at it. So a couple things that I learned when I was just starting out at Nation Builder, the first tech company I worked at, is that when you work at a digital first or digital ready company, it's really easy to work all the time. You have it on your phone, on your watch, on your laptop. I get email notifications, Slack notifications, you name it, I get the notifications. And it can be really easy to get sucked into continuing to work because it's all here. Especially when you're remote, it's that much easier. So a couple things that I encourage are start and end rituals. So my actually former and current employer, while we're all remote, we're doing morning check-ins with the team to be able to ensure that we're all looking at each other, checking in, what's the day look like, and go. It's a really great kickstart to the day. If you're currently working remote as a student, or if you're just getting into this remote life, I'd encourage that. I know I've historically done FaceTime breakfast with friends and we cook together, and it's been super valuable just to have that ritual as like, this is how I start my day. Similarly, having an end of day ritual. Because we are in the state of Corona, I have a virtual happy hour almost every day, and being able to do one last thing on the computer that actually isn't work, but is more connecting with people has been a great way for me to transition out of work mode and into home mode. So another thing to consider there is just having something that signals we're done now. If that's your scent and you turn the candle on and you turn the candle off, whatever works for you, but it's just having those bookends to really block out this is work time so that you can avoid getting sucked into, I was supposed to be done working at 6 and it's 9 o'clock and I haven't left my computer yet. So just be cognizant of how much time you're spending there, because it is really easy while working remotely to just keep on keeping on. A thing that I know I've adjusted to is how we communicate digitally. So when you're in a physical office, you have the opportunity to have passing conversations or water cooler talk. And sometimes those are the most valuable conversations. That's where you get insights from cross-functional departments or other team members you might not see on a day-to-day basis. In remote work, you have to kind of create that. So big recommendation is just to over communicate. Make your work visible, ask questions publicly. Most companies have a chat system, be it Slack, Microsoft Teams, whatever that might be. In those spaces, you'll have public and private channels. Utilize public channels for more general questions. It ensures that multiple people are seeing it. You'll get a question answered more quickly, and it shows that you're working. It's really hard to measure if an employee is working if you're not communicating in those channels. If you're an email first company, being responsive to emails, whatever that might be, but just being mindful of how you're communicating, how frequently you're communicating, and also asking for feedback. Utilize your peers, your managers, your superiors, and just ask for the feedback. Hey, I know this is new. Am I okay? How are we doing? I'd love to get some feedback on how I'm working remotely. It's really valuable to solicit that feedback especially as you're first adopting remote work. I know I have a lot of friends who are currently onboarding into new roles and they're doing so remotely. And it's really hard to actually build those connections and feel comfortable asking for that feedback. But I would really strongly encourage you to just put yourself out on a limb there and ask for the feedback. More often than not, you'll get something positive or something constructive. Either way, you'll get something, and that'll help you understand where you are and where you could be. And especially if you're first starting out doing onboarding virtually in particular, soliciting that feedback will be invaluable. Creating spaces for water cooler conversations, I think, is essential. For me, that's virtual happy hours. In my former role at Nation Builder, once I moved remotely, I would have one-on-ones with engineers and other folks that I had worked with for the last 5 years. And while we didn't really cross paths work-wise, it was great to have those spaces for connection, to hear what's going on in their department, what they're working on, what they're struggling with. So I do encourage, in order to build relationships, really still leveraging those one-off conversations. I know more recently I had a colleague start, I guess on Monday, and I don't know her, haven't met her, but I put a 30-minute block on her calendar, said, hey, would love to meet you. Let's grab a virtual drink and get to know one another. And it was a really valuable way to hear more about her experience. And because everybody's working remotely, it was super personal. I got to meet her kids, I got to meet her husband. It's a really beneficial way to actually get to know somebody, who they are, how they work, and what they're doing. So put yourself out there, create those spaces. I'm sure folks are doing similar things now in your social circles, but being mindful of that is definitely valuable. And then this is something I actually learned from a mentor and colleague of mine, Tim Sanders. Only share your screen when necessary. This is probably the most I've shared my screen, but I realize I can't see any of your beautiful faces, so it's totally fine. But in general, it can be really hard to connect with people personally when your camera's off and they're just sharing their screen the whole time, because you can't see them, they can't see you. It's a different connection. So when you're talking to folks and you're moving into new roles, or even when you are interviewing, only share your screen when absolutely necessary. And if you are sharing your screen, turn off all notifications. You never want to be that person that gets a text from their mom, their dad, their brother, their friend, whoever it might be, in the middle of an interview or presentation. It can be very awkward. So do encourage turning off those notifications. Two last things, because I realize I skipped over my calendar blocks in creating structure. So jumping back up on my list a little bit here, folks. Calendar blocks are super valuable in my opinion. I personally, especially now, we can't go outside really. I need to be able to move my body. I need to get a workout in, move, take a walk, whatever that might be. And so I have a block on my calendar every day. I don't do it at the same time every day, but I adjust it and I create space for that. So figuring out ways you can put blocks on your calendar of working on a specific project, or taking a 10-minute walk, or for me, walking my dogs is often on my calendar. But just to make sure that you're creating a structure and also giving yourself space to focus in and focus out throughout the day is really critical. So having those blocks on your calendar and moving them around as you need to has been incredibly valuable for me. Creating structure, check. Last thing, and super related, is getting up and moving. When you're working remotely, when you're inside all the day, both from COVID and from future of work, it's really important to get up, move, and get out. We had UpWork provided an ergonomic session remotely yesterday, and making sure that your posture's up, but also like moving every hour. If you have a fitness track or something like that, it typically recommends for you to get up once an hour to just walk for a little bit, but I really recommend it. It's helpful to change your space, change your environment, and just make sure that you're still energized throughout the day. So do get up as you can throughout the day and move around. All right. Well, with that, I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen per